Welcome to the Rise to Thrive podcast. Rise to Thrive is your real talk resource to elevate your life and business through growth, wellness, and manifestation. With your co-host, Linda Tate, financial advisor turned life and wealth strategist, founder of Leela Life, and self-named Nordic shaman, and Amelia Travis, yoga teacher turned multi-six-figure business coach, founder of Stoked Yogi, and spiritual warrior. We're here to help you level up and create the life you imagine, sharing inspiration and strategy to elevate vibes and consciousness so you can rise to your best self and thrive as your best self. Tune in weekly to Thrive Daily. Tuning in now. It's 2019 and your investments can be in alignment with the world you are creating. Change Finance is not your normal Wall Street company. They are woman-owned and offer investments that change the world. Go to change-finance.net/MBTY to learn more and start investing today. Change Finance is a registered investment advisor. This is not an offer to buy or sell any product. Welcome to Rise to Thrive with your hosts, Linda Tate and Amelia Travis. And today our special guest, Sophie Frabotta, spiritual life coach and modern healer. We are so excited to have her on the show today and to teach us about how you don't just need to be in survival mode, but you can thrive, which is the ethos of our show. So welcome, Sophie.
Thank you. Happy to be here with you, bubbly butterflies.
I love that, the bubbly butterflies.
We're super stoked that you're here, Sophie. You guys, before we hit record, we were just already getting right into the groove and getting connected. And Sophie has a hell of a story, you guys. She, isn't just calling herself a spiritual life coach and modern healer, from having a collection of crystals. Like, this girl has been through the fire and been through some shit, and is really operating from a deep, intuitive and very real knowledge of the abiding power of the divine and how it works through us. So I'm so excited, Sophie, to hear more about your story and your relationship with spirit and how you infuse that into your work and how you help other people find that connection. Because it sounds like that's what you're doing. Yeah.
Don't let her fool you. She has quite a few number of crystals also.
Oh, they've got to be in there somewhere. So Sophie, we'd love to hear you share who you are.
Yeah. Well, I am, I would say, first, just a being on this planet with a mission to drive home the point that we all have a purpose, we all have a mission, and we're all the same. It doesn't matter like what we look like, where we come from, how old we are, walking the path right now. We are in this together and we all affect each other. And we can really live our greatest, most aligned self if we do the work to get into that space and then walk from that space.
I am you. You are me.
We are all together.
No, I went somewhere kind of deep when you were saying that. So thank you. And I think about you, Sophie, in one of the moments in my life where you helped me re-remember, but it was probably 5 years ago. And she said, you just need to make sure you're plugging in. And it was so basic, like it's so basic. And I feel like that's something you hear so much. And that was transformational. And she's like, no, literally, you have a socket that you can plug in and make sure you're plugging in. And that was at a time for me where I was in my own major waking up, and it can be that simple. And I share this with our listeners to remind them that they can plug in if they're not feeling plugged in at any moment.
Mm-hmm. From that seventh chakra, your seventh chakra cord, open up that lotus, find the divine socket and plug in. That's one of my daily practices is, grounding to Mother Earth, plugging into the divine, and then opening the heart and finding that inception point. Like if we take the heartbeat, where that started in the uterus, like that has never stopped from the moment it started 6 weeks after conception. So that is your inception point, and that is your highest point of light. It's in you, it's in me. So every day I ground to the earth, I connect to the divine, and then I go to my inception point and I start to grow my light in my heart. And then I do a lot of other activities inwardly to get the energy balanced and moving. But yes, the plugging in is a huge pillar, I think, in being grounded and connected so that we can be a spiritual being in this modern planet, making our impact, but still being aligned to something greater and able to walk in this modern world.
This is interesting where you're talking about being connected to the earth. And do you find, in some spiritual practices that it can be easy to get ungrounded and kind of flying up in the ethers?
Airy. I observe that in a lot of people. I really believe that and my butt helps me with this because my butt is really heavy, right? Like I've got like heavy Russian legs and a butt. So I am like naturally grounded. I have to do a lot of like lifting work, but I have a lot of friends that are airy. And I feel like I'm the hematite. If I were a stone, I would be hematite. And I love like angel aura, like anything that's like bright and glittery, because I'm that hematite, like Russian bull. And so I don't have that problem, but I know that that's a very common spiritual problem. But I still do a lot of grounding work because I feel like I chose as a spirit to come into this body to walk the earth, and I can never forget that. So like I'm really big into blending the spirituality into my modern life. Like I love mascara and like crazy chakra journeying. I'm going to do both. I'm not going to stop wearing mascara because I'm spiritual, and I'm not going to stop talking about chakras because I love Jesus. Like I just blend it all together, get it in the basket. And I believe, and one thing I talk about a lot with my clients is spiritual respect. That I don't care what you call it. I just care that you're connecting. And I'm just trying to remind people to connect.
And with that connecting, we'll pause for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. We're good. We'll connect it in. Barney's connected. With that connecting, I find that it's easy to, I'm going to start over. So you said, repeat yourself.
Back up to spiritual respect.
Spiritual respect, yeah.
So I really believe in this concept of like spiritual respect, which means I don't care how you are, how you talk about God, the words you use, what words turn you off, like it matters, but ultimately it's just that you're connecting with something greater, something bigger than yourself. I don't care if that's through the sunshine at the beach, through Jesus in the church, through getting down and praying 5 times a day in the Muslim, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you're connecting. And that's part of what Linda was talking about with the plugging in. That's like a connection. It's a symbol of this energetic space that we can visit and access and have that connecting point. And then we download that and pull that into our eyes awake life.
I'm so thankful that you said that, Sophie, because as you guys were talking about plugging in, I'm someone who has that very strong spiritual inclination and spiritual leaning, and I'm fully with you on the Jesus and the chakras, like, and really just finding this beautiful space in the, non-duality that exists as the foundation of our being. However, I know that not everybody relates that way, right? And I think of people like my sister, who's what I call a devout atheist, which is kind of like, a funny paradox, but she's a scientist, and she's a scientist to the extent that like she derives the greatest awe and wonder from the cosmos, the external cosmos, from seeing it out there, right? And where we see this parallel and we're like, yes, and that same external cosmos is happening inside of us, not everybody necessarily feels that way. So I love that you cleared up for people that this connection with something bigger than yourself, you have an infinite number of options for where to find that connection. And I think for people who feel either spiritually turned off, like they feel like this whole conversation is just kind of like annoying to them and it's just a big old eye roll because those people are out there. I would love to hear, like, you know, you said one thing, you said like going, you know, to the beach and watching the sunset or the sunrise, but like, if you had to give me the baby, like super baby step of like, if a person doesn't relate to this concept of spiritual connection, but they have the curiosity as far as to say, like, what are all these people talking about? What would you advise them to do?
They are constantly having a conversation in their head, right? Whether they are conscious of the chatter, our minds are constantly going. We have, you know, it's been reported up to 60,000 thoughts a day. So your relationship with this divine connection can actually start in your mind, but it has to start through an invitation, because I believe that ultimately God does not intervene. Ultimately, however, I believe I did have a divine intervention, so there's a little bit of a paradox, but I feel like that's very rare and unique. And maybe it was more of me being open and me just going through, I don't know what it was, but I believe that invitation of just inviting God, I invite you to talk to me. Like what I work with people with like anxiety, right? And I will say, well, have you invited God into that space? I'm really big into the inception point of anything that you're dealing with. There's a point at which it started, and then there's all these like reverberations of energy around it. So rather than just going to the symptom level or the reverberations, the symptoms, the sneeze from the cold, if we go to the inception point of where it started, you can really start to move energy. And so that invitation in your mind, just God, divine, universe, source energy, creator, I invite you into my thought. I invite you into my heart. I invite you into my body. I invite you into my blood. I go as far as saying, I invite you into my cells, my blood, my fluid, everything. And whatever resonates. So someone will be like, well, I don't like the word God. And I'll say, okay, what do you like? And I've heard all sorts of things that range from sunshine to Om, to divinity, creator, source, energy, life force, whatever resonates. It doesn't matter. Love is a big one. So in that moment, if you want to start a spiritual connection, you can just say, I invite love in, because
I love that.
With an invitation.
Yeah, I love that. That was and you pulled the thought right out of my mind, where I'm like, but what if we're working with the person who the word God itself is so infused and inextricably linked with some sort of trauma, where that word that does not fly. You know what I mean? And even source and spirit and even like light, even those can be negatively charged for some people who have developed a very strong resistance around this idea of opening up to something that's bigger than themselves. But I do like then giving the extent of freedom where it's like, pick any word you want. Like, you want to pick avocado if you want to. Like avocado.
I love avocado.
Yeah. But I think
it's funny.
Life and love are two very strong ones.
When you say like, do you believe, okay, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in all these other words, universe, but when you say like, do you believe in life? To me, it's like, it has to be a yes, because we're even having the conversation, and that feels like as neutral of a starting spot as a person could have. Do you find that?
Yes, I haven't really heard anyone use life in that spot, in that conversation, but I think it's a great point.
I'll just like literally like this is as baseline.
Yeah.
I had dated a gentleman who could not wrap his head around God. I think like the devout atheist. And I would think back to, he's like, it's just life. And I'm like, yeah, it's just life. Like, there, like, yes. And that's like, I always go back to that moment, because I'm like, exactly. Yeah. It's just life.
Yeah.
Could you talk about your awakening that was not necessarily your invitation?
Yes. So I would say, I wouldn't necessarily call it an awakening. I would say my awakening came later, but my transformational moment, the pivoting factor of what turned me on to this work was back in 2001. I was at school and I was not doing well. I was doing a lot of drugs. I was doing a lot of hallucinogenic drugs. I was a hot mess. I was bulimic, and I was getting to the point of just feeling suicidal. I'm like, I just didn't want to do it. Long story short, I ended up coming home for Easter 2001. The pastor of the church that day preached on a start of new beginnings. And I was just like, damn, I need a new beginning. And maybe that was my invitation right there, is that I need a new beginning. And the divine heard me. Well, I didn't expect what was going to happen that day. But later that day, I was on the back porch with my mom. And if you know anything about bulimia, you know it's a secret. It's not something we talk about. We hide it. That's a big part of it, is the secret element of it. And all of a sudden, I just confessed to my mom. I was like, I'm throwing up my food. I'm doing drugs. I'm a hot mess and I want to die. And my mom was like, okay. She kind of
Easter.
Yeah, leaned forward and it was like, okay, crisis mode. I'm going to give you some restrictions and some boundaries, which she very rarely did, and gave me a structure to live in. So she said, for the next 3 weeks, you have 3 weeks of school left. Go back to school. Don't do any drugs. Don't drink any alcohol. You can eat as much as you want, but do not throw up your food. Can you make that commitment to me? And I've always felt very strong, like your word is all you have. So don't say it if you don't mean it. And so I gave her my wholehearted yes in that moment. And I went back to school and I didn't drink. I didn't do any drugs. I definitely was overeating, but I had like this permission to overeat. So it was different. And then a week later, it was a party week at my school and I was a designated driver. And that next morning I woke up with a woman running into my room saying, oh my gosh, our friend was killed last night in a car accident. And it was very devastating. Sitting at her funeral, I was really shaken up and I had my arms around two of my friends that were just melting with tears. And I just felt like this little tap on my shoulder. And it felt like the divine saying, you know, you've been given a second chance. So what are you going to do with it? And I thought, I have no freaking clue. But I ended up going back to school, going home, not going back to school, and eventually getting back into therapy and having some mild improvements. And then I found life coaching actually through a TV show called Starting Over, which was with Iyanla Vanzant and Rhonda Byrne. It was back in 2004. And it was these 6 women living in a house. This was like at the beginning of reality TV. Wow. And I taped every episode with a VCR.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did every exercise they talked about with every woman. And within 6 months, my life was drastically changing. And I was like, okay, God, what do I want? And God was like, let's get you back in school. And I was like, okay. I lived in Princeton, New Jersey at the time. And I was like, I want to go to a Christian college just to keep it a little bit more clean. So I was like, Christian college, tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania. And Palm Beach Atlantic popped up.
Oh my gosh.
And I was on a plane within a week. I came down here. I was like, yes, I am home. I got off that plane and the humidity kind of like wrapped around me. And I felt like it was God's blanket. And I was like, I'm home. This is my home. So I moved down here and I've never left. And that's been since 2004. So
God's blanket. I'll never look at humidity the same again.
Tell yourself that when it's 100 degrees with 95% humidity in the middle of July at 11:30. You're like, this is God's blanket. It's really cozy. Wow, that's so incredible. So you were young, Sophie. You were college age when you really started your conscious spiritual journey and also decision to help others, right? When you chose to go back to school, were you planning to study theology? Is that why you chose a Christian college, or were you what?
I had a pretty big, after my friend had died, and I went back to church and I really got connected to Jesus. I really felt like Jesus ripped me out of quicksand, and I have a very strong relationship with Jesus. So naturally, I was in the church environment. However, my vibration started to kind of push me out of that environment. And I did go to a Christian college, and I just was met with a lot of challenge for the way that I believed, and the meditation that I did, and the chakras that I believed in. And, you know, my vibration just kind of pushed me out of that. So I still have a very strong relationship with Jesus, the healer, and Jesus, this incredible presence that lives within me, but I do not go to church, and I am not, I mean, if I have to check a box, I'll check Christian instead of Muslim just because of my background, but I really consider myself a spiritual being that is connected to the divine, and I don't define it by religion.
So I think I just relate to you so, so deeply on that. You know, without going into all the details of it, I also grew up actually relatively anti-Christian. Not for any reason. I grew up kind of going to church, but then as a teenager decided that wasn't for me. Thought Christians were really judgmental. The irony is not lost on me now. And just really refused to even do the research into that. But I looked into other religions and things like that. Long story short, seriously drug addicted, severely anorexic, after an abusive relationship, all this stuff. God really pursued me, and he pursued me through the person of Jesus. And it's interesting because the perspective that I have on that now is that I was deeply in need of forgiveness, that I couldn't continue operating in my life without believing that I was forgiven for the things that I had done, because the things that I had done were a lot of different things. I mean, stealing, lying, you know, having sex with a whole bunch of different people, all these drugs, you know, because you have a comparable story, you have your own story in that. But what I see now is that, you know, Jesus pursued me and revealed himself to me and gave me this opportunity to understand God through a lens of complete, pure compassion, forgiveness, and love, and yes, healing. And then as we grow and evolve in that relationship, and we grow in our own self-awareness, and we start to realize our own divinity, and we start to realize that when the Bible says that we're created in the image of God, we are created in the image of the creator of the universe. That's an incredibly powerful statement that I should not be glossed over, right? And the energetic vibration, or the frequency that we're operating in, is something that there's a lot of fear around in Western Judeo-Christian culture, right? Like if you talk about things like chakras or things like that people are not necessarily super responsive. But I'm just so in love with the way that you expressed it, because I too still have this deep, powerful, abiding relationship with Jesus. And I also fully agree with spiritual respect. You call it whatever you want to call it. God doesn't need you to call him by a particular name, him, her, they, you know what I mean? God knows who God is, right? And so you need to figure out who you are. And the more that you start to understand yourself, the more that you're going to start to understand God. And I think vice versa. I think that one of the challenges with church as an institution is that it often, not always, but often becomes a one-way street where people are receiving the input, but they're not doing their own active engagement with exploration of who God is, and asking, okay, grow me further, help me understand further, help me grow with you even more. And so I want to thank you for that revelation, because we have a lot of listeners who identify as Christians, who identify as believers. We have a lot of listeners who don't, and who identify with the spiritual vibration and, and yoga philosophy and Vedanta. And I just love that you're sharing that there's a place where you can fully believe in both, and you're not wrong or bad or, screwing up.
They say, we're operating through five senses, that it's a joke that we think through the five senses that we can understand like the vastness of exactly what we're talking about. Yeah. And it's just not really possible.
Yeah.
Well, and I think through the sixth sense, we start to get glimpses.
A little closer.
Yeah, I really do. I think that through those chills that happen all over your body, I think when the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, I think clairaudience, clairvoyance, I think many of us are getting glimpses of God, awareness of our highest self, you know, those moments in meditation often. But yeah, I think that even that is going to be laughable to us when we're in our full spiritual costume somewhere beyond this life, and we're operating in the reality of who and what God is as this foundation of being, and also as our nature. I think it's going to be so cute the way we tried to comprehend it in this life.
Yeah, they're actually, like, one of the things that I work with people on is identifying your spiritual gift and the way that spirit will connect with you and move you. So I'm clairaudient, so I hear spirit. I have a friend who's clairvoyant. She actually sees in cursive, like words written or sentences that she can interpret immediately. And, you know, I think that, like, understanding your gift and how spirit works with you is like the next part of the invitation. But one thing I love that kind of correlates to the sixth sense, or like how can we possibly, we're like barely scratching the surface, is they say when you start your relationship with spirit and like you're trying to, let's just say, listen to spirit, it's kind of like being underwater and spirit is in a boat on the top of the water and has a tube and is speaking down into the water. So it's like, row, row, row. And, you know, so to lower their vibration so much just to make that connection. And so we have to raise our vibration. And that's part of all, if people have seen like, oh, raise your vibration, and there's just kind of a movement about that. And being in a higher vibrational presence is part of the journey that helps us kind of decipher what's coming from that tube. And that's like so baby. Mm-hmm. It's like a baby playing with blocks, you know? And that's where we are, and that's okay, because that's the incarnation I believe we've chosen, you know, to live on this planet. And like, I don't know, this might be out there for some, but it's very true for me. I really believe, like, I haven't been to Earth before and I'm not coming back. This is my one time that I came here. I came from a very, very far galaxy. I don't feel familiar. Things were really difficult for me here. Like, I had trouble walking on gravel because it was so upsetting. I really didn't read a book until I was like 20. I don't know how I got through high school. I didn't even know there were words in songs until I was like 16. I just thought it was sounds. Like, I really struggled with getting it here. And they tested me for all this kind of learning disability stuff. And I always, they were just like, I don't know. It's not really like anything. Like, I don't know.
It's not that concerning.
Yeah. So I just like kind of got through, and cliff notes and all. But anyways, you know, I really believe that this is my shot. I am very clear on what my mission is here on Earth, and I'm not coming back. So it really changes the way I live while I'm here.
Will you tell us that mission?
Absolutely. I believe that ultimately my mission is to bring ancient wisdom to the modern heart. Like, that is my mission statement. That is on my business cards. That's at the bottom of my emails. That if I boil down a 40,000 word thesis describing what that means, those are the 5 to 7 words that come out on the bottom. And so I believe that you can heal anything that comes your way. So that now that's like the action that comes from the mission, or rather the vision, is that we can really heal. We can heal from illnesses. We can heal from cellular breakdowns. We can heal from mental distortions. We can heal on every domain. However, it does take work, and it takes practice, and it takes consistency to really finally click that last piece into place that creates the freedom.
When you say ancient wisdom, so, you know, yoga philosophy asserts that we're currently in a time that's called the Kali Yuga, which means the Iron Age. And it's also the age of spiritual ignorance. And that the teaching is that, you know, some 20,000, 40,000, however many years ago, that we did have more spiritual wisdom or spiritual connection or spiritual awareness, and that people's awareness of their spiritual gifts, clairaudience, clairvoyance, you know, that those were not only more commonly accepted, but venerated, and that the priests and the priestesses were in these roles as, you know, leaders within their community in a different way than maybe they are, at least in Western culture today. When you say that you're bringing ancient wisdom to the modern heart, what is that ancient wisdom? Is it something where you can even identify like what point in human history, or is it like a deeper than that?
So one of the like workshops that I offer is how to hold ancient space. And what I'm really talking about here is like, you kind of have to go into the quantum field and leave your logic like at the back of the room and float over here to like, I guess, kind of wrap your head around it. But basically, it's not logical at all. It's not anything I've learned. It's not anything I've like picked up. Maybe there's some teachings here and there, but it's a vibration, really. Like when I say ancient, I'm talking about a vibration of knowledge that is and will always be. Mm-hmm. And I believe that that space is what opens when I in my coaching space or healing space. It's something, it's not me. It's just something that happens in my work that I am so honored to be able to play with. And it feels just like I have access to something like a database of some sort that is very ancient and knowledgeable. The other day, Linda had asked me if I do any like Akashic record work, and I don't, but I, like in that sense, I've never studied it or looked into it, but I do feel like I work with the ancients and this ancient knowledge base that is very vibrational for me. So it's kind of hard to explain it. I love how Eden Alexander, he wrote Proof of Heaven. He was an atheist neurosurgeon that went into spiral meningitis and 95% of his brain was drowned. Anyways, he came out, he had this incredible spiritual journey, wrote a book on it, phenomenal. That is the book that I would say, if you're an atheist, read that book and we'll talk afterwards, see what happens inside of you. But anyways, he talks about when he was trying to translate his spiritual journey that he had when 95% of his brain was in fluid, which proved to him that consciousness is not limited to the brain. He said it was trying to write a story with like half the alphabet. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that's kind of how I feel when I try to translate some of these things that happen in my work or happen through me. Yes, I want to bring logic to it and I want the modern mind to be able to understand it, but some of it's so vibrational that I don't really have the words or the colors or the ability to really explain what it is. And I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. I just call it spirit and I move on.
Yeah, and maybe Linda, maybe you're about to say the same thing, but there's this commonality between near-death experiences, certain plant medicines, specifically ayahuasca and DMT, anything that has the DMT chemical, which is interesting to me that you used to like enjoy hallucinogenics, because to me it's clearly like, oh yeah, your soul knew that you were trying to get to this altered state of consciousness. You were just barking up the wrong tree, or a less effective tree, right? But near-death experiences, plant medicine, and then the Turiya state of meditation, they all describe what you just described, that there's a reality that can't be captured in words, that there's something that's almost, it's beyond synesthesia. You know, you could understand colors and sounds and all of these things blend together in a different way of knowing and being. And when people come back from near-death experiences or from, you know, some of these higher states of meditation, it's just literally impossible to actually capture the experience in words, because it only gets like part of it. So I hear that and I'm like, oh, that's cool. What she's accessing is so cool. I want to learn more. Linda, what were you going to say on that?
I just lately a lot in my own personal journey have gotten to this surrender point where it's like, I don't need to necessarily know every single thing that means. And it's happening so much so fast. And it's like trust and surrender almost on a daily basis. And I'm just like, where before I would want to just in my mind, like, no, and make sense of it. And it's like, some of this is beyond what I can sensibly speak to through these five senses in the daylight. So it's okay, let it go. And kind of, it's been the word freedom. And you've said that a few times today. And I had a call recently this week, and it was a family friend, and she's like congratulating me, and she's like, it just feel like the word freedom is floating over your head. And I was like, wow, like that's some kind of like arrival point where you're like living in that space. But it doesn't maybe make sense to the way that we're groomed in 2019 society. When I'm talking about freedom, it could look and feel much different. Mic drop.
I have one further question for you, Sophie. As a spiritual coach, you know, when we're, for our listeners who maybe feel like some of what we're chatting about is a little beyond their grasp or their reach right now, they're just not operating in that space, but they have the curiosity beyond step one, right? Which is the invitation, which is inviting spirit, God, whatever word you want to use, life, love into your life. Do you have advice towards any tangible, grounded practices that someone can do to get more spiritually connected, to move towards that higher vibration? What do we do?
So I would say it starts in the heart. As we are moving into, you know, the heart-centered vibration of, I would say, Earth. So what I encourage people to do is literally start with your heart and your heart organ, like as logical as it gets. I'm not talking about like the etheric body. Yeah. So you start with your heart organ, and around your heart organ is this like myofascia, right? It's like a sac that your heart sits in. And this sac can actually harden with tension, stress, pressure, hurt. And fourth chakra, our heart, is actually where life force energy enters our energy stream. So if our heart chakra is open, we can receive divine life force energy. And that's part of why healers use their hands typically, although I won't get into that. So healers typically use their hands because that's where our life force energy enters our body. So if your heart is closed, it's hard for life force energy to come in. If the heart chakra, which is the center, the inception point of all of our energetic centers, a lot of people think when they clear their chakras, and I know this is going off and I'll get back to the answer, but when they clear their chakras, they like pour light in or bring light up, but actually your chakras rejuvenate through a spiral. So it starts in the heart, goes to the solar plexus, throat, sacral, third eye, and it spirals in and then out. And that's how you can actually really get your energy moving. But if your heart is closed, you are stuck. So what I encourage people to do, even an atheist, I've worked with atheists, is imagine your heart with that sac around it, and imagine that sac around it as like a stick of butter. And all I ask them to do is take the butter out of the fridge and put it on the counter. So now we're using imagery. We're using our mind's eye to create change in our physiology. So that's the first start. Take the stick of butter that's hardened out of the fridge so it can start to soften. And the way that you can do that in your heart is just imagine, like even placing your hands on your heart, and just imagine that sac starting to soften. And as people do this, lots of different things happen. I've heard people getting chills. I've heard people getting heartburn, flutters of feeling of energy, going completely numb. So it's like this spectrum. But as you start to soften the heart, we have a chance for new energy to come in. And as that new energy comes in, get ready, buckle up, because that's when it starts. So that would be my most tangible exercise or concept.
Heart butter. You heard it here first.
Selling this on the website. Sophie, you have a program that you created, your spiritual life coaching certification, and you have your next class starting in August.
Yep.
And for our listeners that might be curious about, wow, this completely jives, I want to be like Sophie, what would you tell them?
Well, first I would say be you, because you are phenomenal. And that's part of what the program does, is help you find your spiritual gifts and how to turn them into a career. So it's pretty deep, and it's pretty, it's not light. It's a transformational experience over 4 months. We start with a weekend retreat here in West Palm Beach. where your transformation begins. And then we go into four months of online coursework. There's 4 different modules. The first one is inner healing, because I believe that the best teachers are the teachers that know the darkness and know how to bring light into those. So if you haven't sought out your own work and your own darkness, no knowledge in your head is going to help you do that with another person. When you are the work, you can help anyone. So the first module is inner healing. The second module is spiritual awareness. And that's where we really start to download lots of spiritual concepts and study some different spiritual teachers, theory and all that. The third module is spiritual visioning. And this is when we really start to attune with the divine and figure out what your divine mission is. And we define that. And then the fourth one is stepping into being a coach, being a healer, or whatever has come through in that visioning process. And really beginning to launch whatever that is for their next step. So I have people that are teachers that maybe they start seeing clients on the side. One lady wants to start working with animals. She can start that immediately. Mm-hmm. And so it's really finding their path and their gift and showing them how they can start using this in the modern world to support their life.
I love it.
Sophie, that's so awesome. We are going to invite our listeners to connect with you further. Where should they find you on the interwebs?
My current website, well, I have lots of websites because I have a crystal jewelry company. I have a life coaching company. I have a certification company. And then I also have an officiant company where I marry couples. But the one that I would suggest is awakenwithsophie.com. So my company is Awaken Palm Beach, Awaken Life Coaching, Awaken Crystal Gallery, anything you can think of, Awaken in front will lead you to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but awakenwithsophie.com. And that's a PHIE, not an F.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
Yes.
And, I want to invite you to share our book club for this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what?
We talked about Proof of Heaven. Is that if you could invite the readers to enjoy any book, is that the book that you'd steer?
I'm going with that one.
Okay. It came through. I figured that was the book of the week.
Yes.
But
yes.
So it's Proof of Heaven, and what's the author's name?
Eden Alexander.
You guys, Proof of Heaven by Eden Alexander. If you're a skeptic, read it. If you're a believer, read it. If you want proof of heaven or answers to what's beyond, give it a read. It's there in the show notes. Sophie, it's been such a joy taking this time with you. Thank you for coming and downloading all this beautiful spiritual knowledge. And I can just feel, you guys, you can't see her, but I can see her, and she's just radiant with this spiritual essence. So I hope you guys also felt that through, I want to call them airwaves, but I don't know if that's through the airwaves. Yeah. It's been such a joy. Thank you so much, Sophie, for being here with us.
Thank you guys so much. It was delightful to share, and thank you for holding this space.
Yes, you got it. Rise to thrive, ladies and gentlemen.
And this week we're going to leave you with Awaken, Rise, and Thrive. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Dropping gems weekly so you can thrive daily. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today on another episode of Rise to Thrive podcast. We are so stoked that you're here. If you loved today's episode, if it helped you, please share it with a friend, snap a screenshot, tag us on stories at Rise to Thrive podcast, or head to iTunes or Spotify and leave us an honest review. We love you guys. We appreciate you. And until next time, keep rising, keep thriving. See you next time.